Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I had lots of the one lady was a friend from California. She said sausage bar. It was like deviled eggs.
Saw your son.
Yes, sir.
Watching on TV and it's right outside your house.
That was what we used to have at Grace. But I'll make it. I have a recipe.
That's the way that ball just sit on that edge. If he would have hit me, it would have gone right back to
I looked at it and tried to take a picture. This is going good. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for.
Remember when you met us here, we were in the car, I had on the radio.
Good?
You see him at the cell
That's all right. I just wanted to just Yeah, Stone's back in here. Yeah. Oh, good. Which makes you busier. Yeah. Yes, exactly. All right, it is time for us to begin. Clay is going to open us up in a word of prayer.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for today and for all the blessings. Thank you for the rain that you gave us all day today. Thank you for the sunshine that's now coming out. Thank you for the time that you give us to come out of the world, be together on this island, come out of the world, be encouraged, be renewed, be strengthened. That's to be with Brett and all the other teachers tonight, help them to teach in a way that's easy for all of us to understand and to set that message and help us to apply that to our lives and if possible apply it to the lives of those around us. In your son's name we pray.
Thank you. So on Sunday when I was teaching, I mentioned something about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and then Phil asked the question about, when I said people take this thing and go into all these crazy teachings, and Phil asked the question about sexual morality. I said, I will talk about that today, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. But really the whole MDR situation is what I'm going to get to. Because I think it's a subject that needs to be talked about. Besides, I finished my lesson on Sunday, so I had to fill something, so we're going to go ahead and take that. And this is something that we've all probably studied at one time or another, so I will get to Phil's question, but I want to set everything up before I get there. So typically, my perception is that the reason why I think we get trapped up a lot of times on trying to understand what the scriptures teach when it comes to MDR is because we look directly at Matthew 19, and then we start going and start making up all this stuff. When I say we, I mean just generally people. So in order to stop that confusion, I want us to look at Mark chapter 10's account. And we're going to kind of jump around. We're going to be jumping to some different scriptures and breaking this thing down so we can make sure we have some stuff done and then answer the question. All right, so Mark chapter 10. And somebody begin in verse 1.
They left there and went to the region of Judea and beyond.
All these people around Jesus, they're following.
Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?
All right, so let's start dissecting this. What was the Pharisee doing?
Testing.
He was testing him. All right.
They didn't really want to know the answer.
It's so interesting, right? That is 100%. He's not really wanting to know the answer. He's testing Jesus, right? And what's his question that he's asking?
Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?
Yeah, so our first thing we need to do is we always talk about whenever we get divorce. We will always jump into, if you're going to look at marriage holistically, you got to look at other verses. Yes, we're going to be able to make some nuggets out for when it comes to who was able to remarry, but the context, we'll just try to drive everything into this one thing, but we need to understand he is dealing with divorce. So he's not giving a full breakdown on marriage. He's not giving a full breakdown on remarrying. He's answering a specific question. And so that's what's important for us to get to. And so what was his question? What was the next thing? Jesus' response to that in verse 3.
He answered them, "What did Moses command you?"
Now, does anybody find this interesting, that response? What was the question? Is it lawful? What was Jesus' question back?
What did Moses say?
What did Moses say? Are those two different things?
Yes.
Absolutely, those are two different things. He is now about to take them on something. I love the look, because you're saying, why are they two different things? Because he said, is it lawful? And he said, what did Moses say? Because Jesus is about to correct something where they've been teaching wrong all along. Because the Pharisees have been teaching something, and he is getting ready to address him on that. So when he goes into the next verse, he says, is it lawful? So before we jump over there, let's go.
He meant current law at that point.
Yeah, because we're still under the old law, right?
So can I ask that question then?
Yes, go ahead.
So, is it lawful?
Mm-hmm.
And it was law,
Go
I'm
ahead.
rationalizing it. God told Moses what to tell the people the commandments were. So that's what I don't understand why that's not the same.
Great question. Let's go to Deuteronomy. chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. This is very interesting because we read this, what he says about Moses and what Moses done. And before we go there, hold on. Read verse 4. Read what the response was. Because he said, what did Moses command? Somebody read 10:4, Mark 10:4.
And they said Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away.
All right. He said, but Moses permitted. Moses allowed this, is what he's saying. Now, when we go back to Deuteronomy 24, it's going to talk about what Moses was allowing and why he was allowing. Verses 1 through 4. Somebody start reading there.
When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that he finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce.
All right, so before we go there, let's make sure we read that right. A man takes a wife, he marries her, and it happens that he finds no favor in his eyes because he found some uncleanness. What does that mean? Does it? It could. It could also mean that he found some.
That was punishable by death.
Right. Yes, and which is a different story, right? This is uncleanness of, there's just something about her I do not like.
She can't make biscuits.
Say it again?
She can't make biscuits.
She can't make biscuits, right? That is I don't want her no more. She can't. I thought you told me she can cook. She can't cook. I no longer want her. And so what's happening is all of a sudden, he's putting her away. So he says, when you do that, keep reading, Cindy. And so everybody caught John's point, right? If it was sexual morality, punishable by death. So adultery, yeah, boom. So now we have to be dealing with something. Keep going. Keep reading.
And he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house.
All right, here's this woman. You can't make biscuits. You gotta go. Here's your document. Boom, you go, and she's gone. And all of a sudden, here she is. She's a free agent. So they think. And she goes, and what does the Bible say happens? Keep going, Cindy.
When she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her.
It's detested before the Lord. If he dies, she can't go back to the first. So it's not like this thing is released. And so there was this law back there that men were doing things terrible to their women to get rid of them or mistreat them. Remember, women were second-class citizens back at this time. And so what happens is he turns around and Moses permitted this thing, right? So what Jesus is really addressing over in Mark and Matthew is this, hey, what did Moses tell you? He's straightening them out because remember, the Pharisees have been off teaching this for quite a while. Well, Moses said, and he's saying, wait, hold up. That's not what I said. That's not what the word says. And in fact, he even talks about how this thing of this woman going back to her first husband after the other person dies, let's just take it that way because it says it, the Bible called her defiled. She's defiled. Why she's defiled? Because she should have never been in that second relationship, and said that it is an abomination, it's detestable before the Lord.
So 2 divorces or 1 death?
Yeah, 2 divorces, right? So death did not clear her on this situation because she never should have been gone from that part. So God said, hey, so this is a Moses thing that's happening. So God is correcting something that Moses permitted that should have never been permitted. And because of that, we'll begin to drill into Matthew 19 and think, oh yeah, but there's something that Jesus is addressing from the very beginning. And that's why we got to shut that thing down, because that's what he says. But from the beginning, it was not so. This was never the plan. So Pharisees, while you guys are off teaching this, it was never the plan. Let's go back to Mark, please. Mark chapter 10, verse 4.
And they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and put her away.
Verse 5.
And And Jesus answered and said unto them, from the hardness of your heart.
Because you guys were so hardened in the heart, so messed up, he wrote you this. But verse 6 says what?
But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female.
All right, so Moses shouldn't have did it. It's because you guys were hardened in the heart. And here's what happened. From the beginning, it wasn't so, and God made them male and female. Then he says in verse 7, go ahead and read verse 7.
For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife.
All right, so we all know that. Leave and cleave. And then verse 8, he says what?
And they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more but twain, but one flesh.
What does one flesh mean? He said, hey, you should leave your mother and your father, and all of a sudden the two shall become one flesh. What does that mean?
Act as one.
Okay, act as one. Anything else? Interesting.
Somewhat indistinguishable from each other.
Okay. Anything else that one flesh would represent? Wow, there's a relationship there, right? The two become one. Remember, sex is never supposed to be in the picture until you get into marriage, right? Those two individuals are going to become united. They're going to become united in multiple ways, including sex. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, please. Starting verse 15.
Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a harlot? Certainly not.
So hold on. Don't you know that your body, Brent, belongs to Christ? Should I take your body? Should you take your body, Brent, and be joined to a harlot? Absolutely not. Because you belong to Christ. Why would you take your body and be joined to a harlot? That is absolutely absurd, Brent, because you belong to Christ. Why would you do that? Verse 16, Kim.
Or do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot is one body with her?
What does that join mean? We think that means they're sitting there playing dice? Nah. We're talking about a harlot, and we're talking about them being joined. We're talking about sexual. So the sexual relationship of that individual becoming joined to a harlot, they become one flesh. Keep going.
For the two, he says, shall become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. Flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body.
All right, this is very interesting. Start in, man, I want to make sure we don't miss this. He's talking about verse 17, but he who is joined to the Lord is one with him. Then he says, flee sexual immorality. Flee sexual immorality, right? He was just talking about being joined to a harlot, sex. And then he says, flee sexual immorality. Every sin that man does is outside the body, right? But he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? For you are bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God. So he's talking about the prostitute being joined to her, and the very next verse he says, hey, flee sexual immorality. Here's a sexual situation, sex, right? Flee sexual immorality. This is very important as we start thinking. He says, hey, how do the two become one flesh? That involves a sexual relationship there for people to be joined together. So there is a uniting when it comes to that. So when we do that, we can now look back at verse 7:19. Let's go to chapter 7, verse 19. Is that what I wanted? Oh, sorry, 1 Corinthians 7:4. I said 7:19. How about that? 7:4.
The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife.
Okay, so here's talking about these bodies not being your own, but it belongs to the other person, right? Do you know how we even got in this situation in the first place? How Paul got him here? Go to verse 1. What's verse 1 say?
Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman.
All right, yours says sexual relations. Somebody else's version says to touch a woman, right? So we are talking about something that has to do with physical. The reason why this is important and why I'm bringing this up is because there is this thought out there, and I have heard it because I've had many studies with people, many states are counseling people, where the woman will say, the man is watching porn because the word spiritual or sexual morality means pornea, and there's a problem, and when I'm watching porn, I can put them away. No, you cannot. Why did I go through all that? To make sure we understand this becoming of one flesh, and all of this stuff has to do with touching. And when he talked to him, when he said flee sexual immorality, he talked about being joined to a prostitute. He went through all this one flesh stuff. That watching is something else. And I am absolutely saying it is a sin. I don't want anybody to understand that. But if you want to say, well, pornea, and this is how this goes and all of that, that's a bridge you cannot cross. Because if that's a bridge you want to cross, then we're going to have to start making some absolute assumptions on some other stuff. That means if I happen to watch somebody get drunk, then I'm in sin because I'm now drunk. That means if I watch somebody cuss or hear somebody cuss, I'm doing the same thing because I am visually looking at it. See, that's where their mind is. Because I saw other people having sex, then therefore you're really having sex with that person because you're lusting after them. Don't you know that God is so great of how he addresses stuff? Go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. Somebody read that when they get there.
You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
All right. So I'm going to ask an easy question. Somebody who looks at somebody with lust, for lusting purposes, did they commit adultery? No, because the Bible does not say they committed adultery. It says that they committed adultery in their heart, right? And he even talks about, if we go up a few verses, to talk about how things start here, and if you don't get this locked down, then there's going to lead to other stuff. So if we go up to verse 25 of Matthew, hold on, maybe that's what I want. Sorry. 22, thank you, sir. Go ahead and read that for me, Mike.
But I say to you that everyone who's angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever says you fool shall be guilty enough to go to fiery hell.
Right. So, keep on, sorry.
Therefore, if you are presenting your offering before the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there and go before the altar and go first and be reconciled to your brother, then come and present your offering. And then also down further it talks about if your hand causes you to sin, throw it out. If your eye causes you to fall. If looking after a woman to lust after her is considered adultery, then there would also be a lot of one-eyed, one-handed men walking around
all day, right? And that's where this thing gets off track again.
And convicted of murder.
Yeah, and convicted of murder, right? And this is where we get off track. I understand. I want to be. Look, I told you guys, I was raised on porn since the age of 4, so I get the gravity of this, right? This is a real thing. So I'm not by any ways trying to minimize that. I just want us to understand that we will sometimes put things out there because how we feel, emotion, and all this. And we can make the same mistake that the Pharisees made, going about teaching something that God never commanded. He's saying, hold on. From the very beginning, I set this thing up. of how it works. And yes, there's sin. When sin enters a picture, there's always going to be consequences. But because somebody's not being who they should be, does not make it be that you can be somebody else. And we are going to see that locked down in a second, because there's an argument people make that we're going to touch. All right. So here we have this about adultery in the heart, right? So then I want to take this and I want to go back over to Matthew 19 now that we set some foundational stuff. And we're going to read through that and talk it through. All right, Matthew 19, and somebody start going. In verse, we'll start in verse 3.
The Pharisees also came to him, testing him, saying to him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?" He answered and said to them, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female?"
Isn't that interesting when you hear this one? Over the other version, he said, what did Moses say? Because now it makes more sense when he says, have you not read? It's already there. You're testing me on something you already know if you're paying attention to what was written. Keep going.
And he said, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then, they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate."
All right, let me pause and ask a question. What God has joined together, let not man separate. Can man separate what God has joined together? They can't, right? Man cannot separate it, meaning it doesn't count what man does. What God has joined together, it is joined, and the only person that can or only individual who can separate is God, right? Once God makes something, it is that unless God says it's no longer. And so this thing is saying, hey, once man and woman are joined together, they're cemented. Now, all the other garbage may not uncement it, they're cemented. That's why this becomes very important. Keep going.
They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away?" He said to them, "Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so."
It's so clear, right? That's why I said don't go to Matthew 18. Because when you go to Mark and you start reading this and break it down, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense what he's saying, right? It wasn't so. We've read over that a million times. It wasn't so. From the beginning, it wasn't so. Why do we know? Why did Moses permit us to give up? Why did Moses allow it? Have you not read? Well, then why did Moses allow it? Moses said it was okay. There's a very important lesson in there for us. Doesn't matter what somebody else says, you better make sure what God said, right? This is very critical when it comes to matters of the soul. Not opinion, matters of the soul that we can lose our soul over. All right, keep going.
"And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery."
All right, so let's draw the diagram. So here's what Jesus said. And I say, you have this individual, or these individuals. These two are joined. And what God has joined, man cannot separate. Well, you know what? I don't like the way they can't make biscuits. So Brent is going to cross this out. And God is saying, that's funny because Brent, this doesn't matter. You can cross out whatever you want. They're still joined together. And then he says, well, okay, I understand that. Or at least I think I'm free, but here comes this innocent bystander. This innocent bystander is going to come and marry the person who was put away. Read what it says again. I can't draw without just stick figures.
"And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery."
All right. This person commits adultery, and this person commits adultery. They can be a 100% innocent bystander and never knew, but they married somebody who was not scripturally put away. I know of people, met them, I don't know them well, but when we lived in Ohio, who there was this man and woman who had been married. They were in an adulterous relationship and did not know. I was there the week after they found out. Through a sermon that a friend of mine preached, and I was dumbfounded. They literally understood what? Studied with him that week and took care of it. And still both went there with the church. I don't know many people that could do that. That is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, because you know how hard this would be? This is a very sad situation, especially for this individual. But it doesn't change.
Did they have any kids?
I don't remember. They hadn't been married long, but they were both previously married. Or I think there were kids involved, but I don't remember. It's a long time ago now. I'm getting old. So it's sad for this person, but this is what the Bible says. Whoever marries this person is in adultery, right? And then somebody is going to say, keep reading. Did you finish that verse?
Yes.
All right. And then what does verse 10 say?
His disciples said to him, if such is the case of the man with his wife, it's better not to marry.
Man, if it's this complicated, don't even get married. That's some smart disciples, right? So let's deal with the elephant in the room where most people get caught up. Well, you know what? That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and divorce Stacy. I just won't get remarried, and I'll be okay. Wrong answer. Somebody read Malachi 2:16. What does that say? God hates divorce. So here we have this thing, and we're talking about two sins. This is the problem. The first one is divorce. So why? Because Brent, you can't, what God joined together, Mike, you can't separate. So I can't just do this and be okay. That's not okay. God's not okay with that. So then this thing gets a little bit more tricky, right? Because now we don't have an alternate path, and people will say, hey, well, I think there is some, I think there's some wiggle room about that, Brent. I think that you maybe misunderstand it. Let's go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I'm going to walk through where people get this idea that they can divorce as long as they don't remarry. I'll just stay single for the rest of my life. Verse 10 and 11, please.
But to the married I give instructions that not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not leave her husband, but if she does leave, she must remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband, and that the husband should not divorce the wife.
So this is where most people say, well, there it is. Shouldn't, but if she does, then it'll be okay, right? You know the verse that says, if somebody slaps you on the face, turn the other cheek? You guys know that? Off of the other cheek? Did you guys ever catch the word that happens? If? If is just really contingency. Doesn't mean it should happen. You think it's okay to slap somebody in the face? Not like this. It's not okay, but it could happen. And if it happens, this is what your reaction should be. And so he really drills into this idea in verse 15 of 1 Corinthians. We're going to read that.
Yet the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave.
Sorry, go up to 13 for me. Start there.
And a woman who has an unbelieving husband, and he consents to live with her, she must not send her husband away.
Now, this is very interesting. If a woman, do you think that woman is a believer? Yes. If a woman has an unbelieving husband and he chooses to live with her, she must not send him away. Keep going, Mike.
For the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife.
Everybody knows what that means, right? Sanctified doesn't mean he gets some special privileges. Doesn't mean that. Just means that because he's married to her, there's some benefits he will reap being married to her. Sanctified in that fashion. Not that he has a pass to heaven.
And the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband, for otherwise your children are unclean, but now they are holy.
Keep going.
Yet if the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave.
All right. If who leaves?
Unbelieving.
Now that's very interesting, because what he's dealing with here is the sinner. You can't control what a sinner's going to do. That's what this is really. It's not giving a pass to a Christian. And sometimes we read these verses and we say, oh, well, the Christian has a pass. We never get a pass. You know what our pass is called? Grace and mercy, and we get heaven. We don't get a pass. And so if the sinner decides, forget it, I don't like it because you can't cook biscuits, I'm going to use that. You can't cook biscuits, bye. Then if they leave, what does it say?
The brother or the sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace.
All right, what does that mean, not under bondage? Go back to verse 4 and 5 that we previously read. Same chapter.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The wife does not have authority over her own body, but her husband does, and likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a season.
Oh, I forgot to even touch that part, Mike, thanks. I forgot that the Bible says, right?
He's not talking about football season.
He's not talking about football, right? He's not talking about, he's not talking about football season. And in fact, he even tells you, only do it by prayer and fasting so that you don't give space to Satan, because Satan will come, right? So he's addressing this whole thing. Your body doesn't belong to you, their body, that's a bondage thing, right? There's an obligation there. And here's what he's saying. Hey, if you have an unbelieving spouse who says, ha, I'm done, I'm leaving you, you're no longer bound to them bondage and the fact that you now have to be committed and obey them. They left you. You're not stuck in that thing anymore. You still are married. You still are obligated to God, but you're not in bondage to where they can say, you know what? I decided that you need to come over here and come pay my bills and cook this and do that, and they're still living out here being buck wild. That's the bondage you're not under, right?
Submission.
That's submission. Thank you for clarifying. I was trying to get the word. I thought I'm getting old all of a sudden. So submission part. That's what he's saying. You're not under bondage. When we look at verse 15, he's not giving a pass to believers, Christians. Christians don't get a pass. The pass that we get is, hey, if we get left, then we still got to do what we're supposed to do. We still got to be who we have to be, but that's where this thing gets locked down. So, to go back to, let's go one more verse that I think is very interesting before questions start popping up. I think this is like the Deuteronomy 29:29 when it comes to this type subject. Hebrews 13:4. Somebody read that. Hebrews 13:4. Anybody?
Let marriage be held in honor among all.
Among Christians? Is that what it says?
All.
Among those who are members of the Church of Christ? That's what it says? No? All. Oh. So marriage is honorable. It applies to everybody. So people who say, hey, well, this person did this and then they became a Christian, so that was before they were a Christian. Marriage applies to everybody. It is applicable to everybody. So there is no, hey, because I didn't know the truth about what God's word said, it didn't apply to me. It applies to everybody. Keep going.
And let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous.
All right. Why is that verse important? I will play out one scenario in time, and this is a true scenario. So, there's a sister who had belief that her husband was cheating, right? She had heard from many people, but they saw her around town. One day, as she's driving, she had went and bought a new car, and as she's driving home, she went a completely different route. She never goes. She happens to see his car in a hotel parking lot. Okay? And she said, huh. She pulls in, and then she goes, and she goes up to the front desk, and she says, hey, I'm such and such's cousin. Can you call him, please? Yes, she lied. Okay. Just so you guys said, did she lie? Yes. So let's make sure we get that. She sees what room the individual dials. Then she gets on the phone, kind of disguises her voice. He didn't pick it up, and she just said, oh, wrong number or something. boom, but she saw the number. So she goes to the room. And as she gets up by the room, she can hear voices in there, a female and him, turns around and all of a sudden hears the door. She runs over real fast to the side and like gets in a little crevice, like in a little doorway. He happens to walk by her with the ice bucket. Did not see her. As soon as he clears, she immediately goes to the door and knocks. And when she knocks, it's a woman there in her bra and panties. And she says, "You've been sleeping with my husband, da 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 da." He comes and then it's big going back and forth. Now, Matthew 19 says, "Except it be for fornication." Do you believe that she truly believes that he was cheating on her? That's why I think Hebrews 13:4 is important. Because some people will say, unless you physically see them in the act. I think this is why God says that fornicators and adulterers and the like, God is going to judge. Because there's some things that are just common sense. Now, he eventually admitted that, but she had already started the process once she saw that. But there will be people who will say, you know what? Until you catch them and you walk in or they point blank tell you that they've done it, you don't have the right. I don't know how they get that, because I believe it's really going to come down to, why did you put your spouse away? And it better be scriptural that you believe that they cheated, not this other stuff. Yes, ma'am.
There's two kinds of evidence. There's physical evidence and there's circumstantial evidence.
Yes. Yeah.
You can put the pieces together.
Yeah, you can't, and that's a very strong one, right? Not one that seems very, and I think this is where it gets tricky. A lot of times people want us to be the judge of stuff. I'm not a judge. I got the Bible. And I'm going to put all the evidence in front of somebody and I ask a very simple question. Do you feel and trust that you can stand before God and put this person away? Because number one, God hates divorce. Remember that. That's critical. And number two, if this person is innocent and they end up sinning, becoming an adulterer, that's all on you. That's a deep thing. So you better make sure that what you're doing is right. That's why this thing is so important and why we should talk about these subjects. Not the, well, this person isn't treating, they're not treating you right. There's ways to do stuff and we got to address stuff. I wanted to get to the nitty gritty of this whole thing where people think, hey, somebody looking at porn or somebody having bad thoughts or somebody, that is so off of what the Bible is teaching, I believe that we easily can get to when we add up the verses. Mike.
Totally agree. A little bit off the subject. Not exactly. Another verse that oftentimes in experience has come into play is 1 Corinthians 7:20, which says, each man must remain in that condition in which he was called. The argument that comes up with that verse is, well, we were in an unfaithful relationship before we got married. We didn't know that. Now that we've become Christians, everything's wiped clean, we start over fresh, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. That's why that verse about the marriage is honorable and all, that is important, because people need to understand that God does not say, I actually was reading something, it has to be a very institutional congregation. And I literally saw where it said, we the elders basically will talk, if you want to get married in the church and something, and you've been previously married, and it had some crazy, and I'm saying crazy stuff, of why they would justify, and one of those was if it happened before salvation, then yes, they just have all this stuff, and I'm like, what? Where do you get that from? Yes, sir.
My dad, most people know, but his answer to that, you can't ride a stolen horse to church. And it's that simple.
Yes, right. It is that simple, right? And that's why the Bible is funny. When the Bible says godly sorrow brings about repentance, I think what we talked about, that couple in Ohio, that's true godly sorrow. Again, I don't know many people who could have done that. I was baffled when I met them. And I found out the week prior what happened. That's godly sorrow.
Ezra, when the children of Israel were returning and going back, getting back to God, they had married pagan wives.
Mm-hmm.
And they were told to not only put away the pagan wives, but the offspring
That's right.
of those wives.
Right.
Now, I know that's Old Testament, but that's the way God built and how strong God built it.
No, that's a great point. Look, we sometimes, and I get it, we sometimes look at sin, and then again we do what Moses did. Well, do this and do that, and I think that's an important point of what he was addressing. Yes, Phil?
A lot of people have problems with verse 15 and verse 39 of chapter 7 in 1 Corinthians. A brother, if an unbeliever departs, let him depart. Brothers and sisters not under bondage. And we've already discussed that is they're not enslaved to this person anymore. You can't stay gone for 2 months and say, well, I want to go home and have sex for a week and I'll leave. She is not bound or enslaved to him anymore. That's the bondage there. All right. Over in verse 39, that is the marriage bond.
Absolutely.
And a wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives. There are 2 different words there, 2 different Greek words. One is enslaved and one is the marriage bond.
That's a great comment. Absolutely. And yes, after the point of death, that individual is free. That's when God said, because there's only 2 ways he says it, right? Somebody commits adultery, sexual fornication, and the other is if somebody perishes. And then at that point, you're no longer bound. Yes, ma'am.
Go into your picture.
Yeah.
It probably is one of those unbelievable wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that person that married somebody who was not eligible.
Yep.
Is he free to marry?
Yes, because they're not really married here. I'm glad you asked that, right?
Right.
This situation doesn't even count. We think it counts. It doesn't even count. They were never married. That's what's funny. Right. And not funny, haha, funny as in wow.
So I had a question about that too. So does there even need to be a divorce in that instance?
Yeah, so again, this is Brent, right? Very interesting. We have to operate within law. This is where things get interesting, right? At what point when I get married is my marriage official? Is it once the paper's signed? Is it once the paper's mailed in? Is it once we say I do and we kiss, I now pronounce you man and wife? At what point is it official?
Then.
Right, we kiss, right? I do before God made this commitment. Some people will say, I don't subscribe to what I'm getting ready to say. Some people say, hey, well, you have this person and the paperwork was never filed. So all of a sudden they were never married. So as long as they just call it up, I don't understand that. I don't subscribe to that. And I think this is why, again, Hebrews 13:4 becomes important. That when you start looking at all this stuff, God's going to judge. God knows the thought and the intent of man. He knows the reasons why we do stuff. And we start mixing this thing up in all these what-if scenarios. The question you got to ask yourself is, why are you coming up with all these crazy scenarios? What if there's people on another planet? What does that have to do with you and your soul? Thanks for your comments.